This review could change your photography forever. Roll titles. Well, hi YouTube, Brian James, that Micro Four Thirds guy with you once again. And that's a pretty serious claim I've just made, so I'm going to try and back it up through this video. In this video I'm going to be looking at this. This is the TTArtisan 50mm f2 lens. It's a fully manual lens, it's a full frame lens, although this is a Micro Four Thirds review. So let's have a little look at it. We'll open the box up. I've had it out, obviously, I've already done the unboxing. Great little lens. Quite heavy. I'll take you through the specs in a few moments, but heavy metal construction. Unusual little screw-on metal lens cap on the front and a standard Micro Four Thirds type bayonet cap on the back. This can be a bit fiddly. It's very, very good for protection and very, very slim as well, but can be a bit fiddly to take off. But if you don't like it, it's a 43mm thread size, so you can order a plastic one on eBay or anything like that just to fit onto it. They'll work perfectly. I'm going to leave it on for the moment. Now, this, as I said, is a full frame lens. And it's got some significant importance being used on a Micro Four Thirds camera, which I'll let you know at the end, because I think this is a major step forward in my photography, and it could be an interesting philosophy for you as a photographer too. But we'll cover that at the end. Keep watching. The lens, I'll take you through the specs. Well, obviously you can see it's quite a chunky lens. It's 50mm on as a focal length, which gives an equivalent on a Micro Four Thirds camera of 100mm. Now, we all cover this pros and cons of all the things for Micro Four Thirds versus full frame. I'm not going to go into that particularly on there, but I will be referencing on this because it is important, that it's important to what some of the effects that we can get out of this. Now, this lens has, I'll tell you, has been loaned to me by TTArtisan. I haven't paid for it, but I'm going to try and do as straightforward and reliable, if you like, and honest an appraisal as I possibly can. I've got some photographs, a little bit of video to show you, but this lens I've really enjoyed using the last couple of days. Now, UK, well, I think it's about $70, about £70 in the UK to buy, so it's a very, very inexpensive lens, fully manual in both focus and in aperture. So we're going back to the old days, if you like, in a way. But the lens itself is really, really good. Fits straight on the camera, no problem. And when I got my very first Micro Four Thirds camera, my EM5, I bought some adapters to be able to use my old Olympus full frame lenses on that. And they work pretty well. The advantage of this is a full frame lens, and it's designed to have various different mounts. This one comes with the M43 mount. I can't put it on anything else. It's a metal mount, as you can see. But it'll also come in Sony, Nikon, Fuji, Canon. It comes with, for most of the main brands. Now, of course, on a full frame camera, this will be a 50mm lens equivalent, because it is a 50mm lens, and it's going to give you that angle of view for a 50mm lens on that. Where the equivalence comes in is this on a Micro Four Thirds is giving you a lesser angle of view, equivalent to about 100mm lens, and that's because our sensor is a quarter the size. It's a 2:1 ratio. It's a quarter the size of a full frame sensor, and it's taken out the centre. And again, bear that in mind as we go through. The construction of this is really, really good, and as I say, for an inexpensive lens, I've been rather put off the idea of these lenses. A few lenses from a few different manufacturers on the market which are reasonably inexpensive, but I've always thought to myself, well, they must be being built down to a price. Well, they are, if you like, because it doesn't have all the electronic gizmos in. Effectively, most lenses have a small computer themselves built into them. This hasn't got that. This is pure metal and optics, and it is all solid metal construction. I think even the focusing ring and the aperture ring are metal construction, so I can't find any real plastics on this apart from the rear lens cap. So very, very solid piece of work on this. I'll give you a few of the specs. I'll go through the specs now, and this is straight off their page, so I'll let you know this. It's 188 grams in weight, this one, and that does vary depending on what type of mount you've got on the rear of the lens, depending on what camera. But on the Micro Four Thirds one, this particular lens is 188 grams, but around about the 190 to 220 grams, depending on which one you get. Focal length, as I say, is 50mm with a maximum aperture of f2, minimum aperture of f16. The closest focusing on this, bit of a disappointment, is 1/2 metre. And I would have liked to have got something a little bit closer focusing on this, because it would have made a very, very good lens for doing some, getting onto the macro sort of size lens. But it is 1/2 metre focal distance maximum on this one, so that's the limit on there. It's a full frame, as I say. It's got, for the diaphragm, it has 10 bladed diaphragm, and that's fantastic because it really gives a nice even circle. If you're doing the out of focus, the Bokeh type shots, you'll get really nice round circles rather than the squared off edges, if you like. Filter size, I've already mentioned, is 43mm. It doesn't come with a lens hood, which I think would have been useful. I have, on one or two of the shots you may see, got a little tiny bit of lens flare. It's not a huge problem on this, it hasn't been a problem, but I have seen some little bits of lens flare. It doesn't have bayonet mount fits for a lens hood either. However, there are all sorts of 43mm screw-on lens hoods that you can get. Some of them collapsible rubber, some of them fixed plastic. Again, have a look on eBay. They cost next to nothing and they'll screw straight onto the front of that. Optical design on this is 6 elements in 5 groups, and 2 of them are low diffraction lenses on this. The angle of view for APS-C, the angle of view for full frame is 45 degrees, so on a Micro Four Thirds it's about 22.5 degrees angle of view. Weight, as I said, is on this 188 grams, and fully manual focus and aperture. So that's the lens itself. One or two of the bits and pieces I've found, it is a little bit on the heavy side. It is quite big. It is a full frame lens after all, so I would expect it to be slightly larger. And if I just take this lens cap off, we may be able to see through if I alter the aperture. That's a minimum aperture. In fact, let's see if I can get one of these little lights behind it, and if I can, we may be able to see the aperture open and close in there as we do it. Pop that back behind. So overall, great little lens. As I say, this has been loaned to me by the manufacturers, and I was a little bit sceptical before I accepted taking it, to tell you the truth, because as I say, it's not the sort of lens that will float my boat. I've got so used to the idea of using fully automated lenses with fully automatic focusing and aperture adjusted by fly-by-wire. This has taken me back to my old days on EOM 1N when I used to shoot my 35mm camera, which was fully manual. But the advantage of that is it does tend to stop and make you think a little bit about your photographs. So let's have a little think about what the output of this is like and see some of the results. Now, I'll put this down. Before we go any further, don't forget, if you haven't subscribed already, please hit the subscribe button, wherever it is below, and give me a big thumbs up, because it really helps the channel to spread and see more people. And if you do appreciate what I'm doing, there's a little PayPal link below if you want to leave me enough for a cup of coffee. Thanks to all of those who already have. However, back to the lens. I've really been impressed with this the last couple of days. I've taken it out and I've used it in all sorts of situations. 100mm equivalent, 50mm on this, is a really good lens for me. I used to do a lot of portrait photography where you're shooting sort of head and shoulders shots. And my favourite lens on full frame cameras used to be my 85mm 1.8 Canon lens. It was great. It was a robust lens. I really wasn't too worried about the very, very low apertures on this. And this is another one of the same. Now, to me, this is an equivalent to 100mm on full frame. It's a really good lens for taking head and shoulder shots because it gets you nice and close in, and you don't get any of the distortions of a wider angle lens. So it's really, really forgiving when it comes to the facial shots. What I have found though is this lens is unbelievably crystal clear, super sharp. Now if you watch this channel, you know that my favourite lens, or one of my favourite lenses, certainly my favourite for doing portrait work on this, is my 45mm f1.8 Olympus, which I consider to be one of the sharpest lenses on the market for Micro Four Thirds. I think this has the edge. It really, really does. It's a really good lens, super sharp. And it's even across the board as well, so you get that sharpness from one extreme edge to the other extreme edge, and it doesn't seem to have any of the distortions. And again, we'll come back to why we don't have some of those distortions a little bit later in this video, so keep watching. I did find that overall there was very, very little chromatic aberration when I've been shooting on it. There is a very slight amount, but almost every lens does have that, but it's very, very small, and you've almost got to get it into extreme conditions to see it. And it's very easy, if you do get it, to get it out on some of the post-production things like Lightroom or whatever. So it's not a huge problem on this. I've looked at some of the other reviews because, as I say, I'm only shooting this on Micro Four Thirds, but it is a full frame lens, and I've seen some of the other reviews. And one of the problems which is associated with it is a small amount of vignetting. And this is where the big advantage for Micro Four Thirds comes in. Because the difficulty in making a lens, the expense in making the lens, is to try and get the quality of the image even across the whole face of that lens area. Now this lens is designed for full frame cameras, as I say, but any camera, as you get towards the extremes, you're making compromises. You want to get that centre part super sharp because that's where your main subject normally is. But if you're going to make any compromises, it will be around the quality on the outside. And this is where most of the R&D money goes into lenses, and where a lens can cost you thousands and thousands of pounds to get really right. Now, I didn't see on any of the reviews that it was a particularly great amount of vignetting, but it was noticeable. But the advantage of Micro Four Thirds, and I'll try and spell it out a little bit on this one, I'll maybe get a photograph on it, but the Micro Four Thirds sensor is 1/4 the size of a full frame sensor, near enough, and it's that centre part, it's just where my fingers are there, it's that centre section which is Micro Four Thirds on a full frame, compared to a full frame. Now, if you think about it, this is taking all this light in, and the stuff which is going to the sides and the corners, where you get the vignetting, up where my hand is, and you know, the corner areas, that's not seen on this. It's effectively zoomed into the centre. It's only taking that centre quarter piece out of it. So where you were getting the vignetting, you're not really using that part of the lens. You're using the centre of the lens, which is the super sharp, really well engineered part, which is a big advantage for us, because using full frame lenses on a Micro Four Thirds sensor gets rid of all those problems. Now the other problem that you can sometimes get is either pin cushion or barrel distortions, and that's where you'll get either swelling or a concave on top and bottom. But again, they're much more noticeable at the sides of the lenses. When it's in the centre, it's almost unnoticeable. So what does that mean for us? It means that we've got a really good lens where the optics are given fantastic quality with almost no distortions and almost no drop off of light in the corners. And it also means that your sharpness from corner to corner across the centre is almost the same, irrespective of what aperture you're using. Now most lenses, when you're using them wide open, this one is an f2 lens, you will tend to find that you do get problems as you get towards the edges. Again, the Micro Four Thirds on this, by using this lens on a Micro Four Thirds, means that you're well away from where those distortions and softnesses would be. So this lens is super soft from corner to corner, right across the thing, when being used on a Micro Four Thirds camera. This gives me some great shooting opportunities, because for less than £100 I'm able to go out with a lens and get really reliable shots. But the problem with it is manual, and you're having to get to this point to remember to turn the aperture ring, to set the aperture, and look down and see what the aperture is set to. Now as we're looking on here, you can see the markings on the lens itself. They are etched on rather than being engraved in, so I have a little bit of a worry if they would wear off over time. They seem fairly robust, so it may be a storm in the teacup by saying that, but I probably would have preferred to see them slightly etched in and painted into that. There is a disadvantage when it's mounted on the front of a Micro Four Thirds camera. The display does tend to cover over the top of the depth of field markers, which means if you want to see that, you've got to pull the camera right over to see. It does take a little bit of getting used to either remember where the f-stop is by counting the clicks, or to look over at it. The markings on this, as I say, maximum aperture is f2, and up until between f2 and f8, the increments, which are nicely, you can just about hear that I think, there's a really good positive stop on there, they are half a stop apart. Once you reach f8, it becomes full stops, but f8, f11 and f16. So very, very usable, very easy to do, and if you do get used to it, you know exactly where you are, because you can just count the clicks over between them. Focusing on this, the focusing ring is beautiful. It's got around about a 90-degree turn on it. It's super smooth, super well damped, and it's just an absolute joy to use. Now when it comes to focusing, I did find a few issues on this, because I've used it on two cameras for the review. I've used my Lumix G9, which I'm doing this video on at the moment, and also my EM1 Mark II. And between the two, the Lumix is streets ahead insofar as usability. Not necessarily results, but usability. I couldn't find a way to get the focus picking to work with this lens on the Olympus. On the Olympus, if you switch on manual mode with a normal lens on, you'll get the focus picking there, and it makes easy focusing on the camera. With this lens, it just wouldn't trigger it on, and I think that was because there was nothing talking to the camera whatsoever. It couldn't follow what was happening, so the focus picking on the Olympus didn't work. You can focus it. It's not too bad to visually focus, but you're never going to get necessarily that real accuracy. What I did find on the Lumix, the focus picking worked no problem, and I found on both cameras, stick it in aperture priority mode and allow the camera to sort the speed out by using its own metering, and just adjust the aperture on the front to what you want, and I found it was absolutely a joy to use. But it does take you back to the old times where you've got to sit down and think about what you're taking, your subject, and put that little bit of time in. I can't instantly just click off half a dozen shots as I'm moving and expect the camera to keep up with it, because it just won't. I have to do it myself, and I have to reset between every shot mentally and physically on the lens to make sure that I'm well focused and that my aperture is still correct. However, once you do get using that, you can get some extremely good results from this. Why did I say it could possibly change your photography? Well, again, as I've just said, the idea that you're having to slow down, take a bit more time, but also when you're doing that, you tend to take a little bit more effort and time into seeing what the actual subject is in your composition. And by doing that over the last couple of days on this lens, I've found an awful lot of the joy of photography's come back. I'm not just pressing a button and allowing the camera to do everything for me. I've got a good input in there, and it becomes a little bit more of an interactive event between me and the camera, rather than just letting the artificial intelligence or the processing in the camera take over and do everything. Using it on video, I found it was great on video. With this focal length, it's no good for doing the sort of selfie shots on this, but if I was doing longer shots, I'll put a couple of videos up. I found it was really, really good. One problem I did find is you get a certain degree of focus breathing, and it's not a big problem, but if you're using this as a photographer, as a videographer, and you're doing a lot of work with it, you might find it's a bit of a problem. It's not a huge amount of focus breathing, but it is noticeable. So let's get back to things which, well, frankly, get me down a little bit, the bokeh. We've got to discuss bokeh. It seems the standard thing. But people say that you can't get good bokeh with a Micro Four Thirds 4x camera, and we've proved on several occasions you can, but just look at some of the results from this. I did a couple of shots inside a coffee shop, just focusing on the coffee cup, and there was some really nice lighting on the ceiling, and I just managed to get that nicely out of focus, shot at f2, and you can see that the bokeh from this is beautiful. It really is. It's very, very rounded. You can hardly see any squaring off at all because of the 10 diaphragm veins on this. And I found it was an absolute joy to use. One of the advantages of having a longer lens when you're trying to do shallow depth of field is it is actually easier to get a shallow depth of field with a long lens. And a wide open aperture, and because of what we said about the fact that it's a full frame lens which is being used on a Micro Four Thirds camera, we've got away from all those distortions, as I said a little bit earlier, and all the vignetting. And what it does is it gives us the opportunity to use that, get a really good depth of field, and have crystal clear shots right across from corner to corner. One of the other things I really worried about with the distortions was how sharp it was, as I say, from across the board. And if you have a look at these shots where I've taken of the chairs in a coffee shop, it's a difficult pattern to pick up. It's something which can really cause us problems on there. But you can see that the weave pattern in the seat is absolutely fantastic. And as we look in the background for the out of focus shot, again, it's lovely, it's creamy, and it's consistent. So what's my thoughts on this? Well, as I say, it's less than £100. It really is cheap as chips. In fact, a bag of chips is getting to be an awful lot of money these days. So it's catching up. Less than £100 for this, and it's just a solid piece of camera lens. And I think it's something that most people should have in their camera bags. And I think if you do have one in your camera bag, it'll change how you take photographs. Certainly, it's going to change how I'm taking photographs, and it might be a permanent change. I would say that I don't know how easy it's going to be to order it. I've got a link which you'll find below, which will take you to the TTArtisan site if you do want to buy it, and they're going to send me an affiliate link. If I have the affiliate link, that will go underneath as well. And if you do use that, then basically I get a little bit of support for the channel as well if you buy the lens through that. So if you do, just click on that link. If you want to buy it, click on the link through there. But if nothing else, it's well worth a punt just to try it. But personally, I'll be using this lens quite a lot, I think, because I think it's a really interesting way to do photographs, and the optics and the quality on this are outstanding. So until the next time, this is Brian James at Micro Four Thirds guy saying keep on taking your camera out, whichever lens you're using, and keep on enjoying your photography. Have fun. See you next time. Bye bye.